What is up, guys? So the UFC card just wrapped up, and what a night for underdogs. And not only that, what a night for people who bet on those underdogs. For people who usually bet on UFC cards and they didn't watch this card because, they thought it was going to be bad on paper. What I say in every prediction video, cards that look bad on paper tend to be the funnest cards to watch. Well, this one lived up to that as well. So people who bet on UFC cards and they missed this one, they missed on more than just good fights. I mean, they missed on a huge opportunity to make a bunch of money because how many big underdogs won tonight? I mean, we had the biggest upset since Ronda Rousey versus Holly Holm, where Shayna Dawson defeated Maria Agapova. Frankie Edgar was like a 2.5 to 1 underdog against Pedro Munhoz, and he squeaked out a close decision through a 5-round war. Amanda Lemos also won, and she was an underdog. Joe Solecki was an underdog. He defeated Austin Hubbard. And then Trevin Jones, again, one of the biggest upsets since Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey, defeats Timur Valiev in a fight where he was getting dominated in the first round. Looked like he was gonna get finished. He comes out in the second round and turns the fight around, laying that follow-up right hook in his combination, drops Valiev, and then just finishes him off with ground and pound, greatly showing his heart. But let's talk about that main event. Frankie Edgar defeats Pedro Munhoz by decision, 248-47 and then a 49-46 for Pedro Munhoz, which I do disagree with. I don't see how at all you can give Pedro Munhoz more than 3 rounds. Now, first off, this was not a robbery. A lot of people want to throw robbery for every close decision. Well, a robbery is something where there's absolutely no argument you can make at all for the guy that won, right? This is something like Matt Hamill versus Michael Bisping, right? That's a robbery. Ross Pearson versus Diego Sanchez. That's a robbery. It's like where you think, does someone get paid to turn this decision around? If you have that thought, then it's probably a robbery. If you don't have that thought, it's probably a close fight. And that's what this is. If it's a close fight, it's not a robbery. So round 1 was competitive. It was very close. It can go back and forth. I personally thought Pedro Munhoz won it because he landed more damaging shots, mainly the leg kicks. But Frankie was landing a lot of left hooks. Some will point to the numbers and say that Pedro landed more, but in fact, live punch count, which is not really that accurate, it showed that the numbers were nearly even for that round. That can go either way. It really could. Second round was 100% Frankie Edgar. Frankie mixed up his striking with his wrestling finally, which he didn't do in the first round. Once he went with that in the second round, he was able to disrupt the timing of Pedro Munhoz, and because of that, he was able to gauge the timing a little bit better because Munhoz abandoned the leg kicks, and I think it had to do because Frankie was attempting takedowns. He did not want to get his leg caught, right? So he tried to box with Frankie for the most part. Frankie was landing his combinations. Pedro Munhoz went away from the leg kicks, and that hurt his chances a lot for landing his own punches, especially that jab. And because of that, Frankie was able to use his speed advantage and his boxing combination advantage, outlanding Pedro Munhoz in their exchanges, as well as exiting out, not the safest way. He was kind of moving out into the power hand side, but all in all, he was able to get away from the looping shots. He added up the points in that round and won it. Third round was 100% Pedro Munhoz. That was Munhoz's biggest round because he went back to the leg kicks and he was hurting Frankie with them. And because of that, he slowed down the movement, allowing for Munhoz to land that jab precisely. And once he started to land the jab, he was able to gauge for the right hand a lot better, just because of the leg kicks. And then we go into the fourth round, and that was also Pedro Munhoz's round. It was very similar to what was happening in the third round. And then the fifth round came. Frankie showed his heart, showed his toughness, showed his veteran experience, 5-round experience. I mean, he has the most time in the octagon out of any fighter who has ever competed, all right? He has that record. I don't know exactly what it is, but I think it's like 6 hours or something, 5 hours. And it showed, man. He came back after taking some big damage in the previous 2 rounds and was letting his hands go a lot more, firing out that right hand with more conviction, with more power in it, sitting on it a lot more, and even stunned Munhoz in that round. It was like the only time where one of them was obviously and clearly stunned from a punch. Frankie stunning Munhoz with that piston of a right hand right down the center, and he just kept landing it in the 5th round. Munhoz's defense was kind of lacking, especially for those straight punches. He was just looking to counter back and brawl it out, That was his defense to Frankie's engagement. It was getting him caught a lot, but he was able to find some of his shots throughout the fight because of those exchanges, because he was able to catch Frankie moving out a certain direction, and because the leg kicks were landing, he was able to keep Frankie in the center instead of moving around all over the place. So Frankie had to have won rounds 1, 2, and 5. If he won rounds 3 and 4, that's weird. Like, that shouldn't happen. If Pedro Munhoz won rounds 2 or 5, that's kind of weird as well, It all comes down to that first round. I personally thought Pedro Munhoz won the fight after it happened, but I did acknowledge that it's such a close fight. That first round was competitive. Frankie could have won it. He landed some really good shots there. It looked like Munhoz's leg kicks were the ones that were really adding up damage, but Frankie was landing that left hook constantly in that first round, so it was really hard to say other than what the judges think. and they gave it to Frankie. Not a robbery at all. It was a good win for Frankie Edgar. He went through a war, a lot of action back and forth, and this really shut down the questions about Frankie Edgar's chin. That was the biggest thing coming into this fight, and I even thought it as well. I thought Frankie might be shot. I thought if he took a big shot from Pedro Munhoz, who does hit hard, he'd probably go down. Well, he ate Munhoz's biggest shots. He ate overhand rights, looping power punches, and none of them really looked like it hurt him that badly, right? He was able to take it, it shook him up just a little bit, but then he got into the groove again, into the motion of the fight immediately. And it just tells you how hard Brian Ortega and Korean Zombie hit. When they hit him, there was no getting back into the motion of the fight. He was rocked from their blows, right? Ortega landed that picture perfect counter elbow when Frankie ran into it, and Korean Zombie just let the hands on him, and we all know how precise Korean Zombie hits. And that's what it might be as well, because Pedro Munhoz is not the most precise puncher. He's a lot more precise with the leg kicks, but his punches are a little bit too looping and wild, and it might be a reason why Frankie was able to probably see the punch coming before it hit him, you know? Whereas Ortega and Korean Zombie, their strikes hit Frankie without Frankie ever even knowing they were coming. So all in all, great performance by both guys, but great win for Frankie Edgar in his bantamweight debut. This is exactly what he needed, beating a top 5 opponent in his very first fight. He's chasing that title shot, man, and with a performance like this against Pedro Munhoz, he's probably going to stick around in the top 5, most likely. He's probably not going to beat a lot of those guys, but he's going to be competitive, and that is great to see for such a legend in the game. And who these two should be fighting next? Well, Frankie defeat the number 5 ranked Pedro Munhoz. That's a great win, man. Gets him right into the top 7 right away. I honestly do want to see him fight Dominic Cruz, but Cruz is number 10. I don't know if Frankie would take that fight. I don't know if that would be his priority in the division, although it is kind of crazy to see Dominic Cruz be number 10 in the division. I can kind of understand because he's been out for so long, but it's still weird coming off 2 losses against the 2 top-ranked guys in the division, you know? Well, we do know that Corey Sandhagen is fighting Marlon Moraes. Aljamain Sterling should be fighting Petr Yan. Cody Garbrandt's at 125 now. So literally everybody above the number 5 contender is booked doing something. Do you run Jose Aldo with Frankie for the 3rd time? I don't like that fight for Frankie, man. I think Aldo just has his number. They could do Jimmy Rivera versus Frankie Edgar. You know what though, those 2 guys are below what Frankie's going to be if Frankie takes that number 5 spot. So if that's the case, let's do Dominic Cruz. Let's just do it, because he's going to fight someone who's below him either way. And Cruz is a legend. He's one of the best fighters in this division regardless of rank. Forget the rank. Skills, he's definitely top 5 in this division. So that's the fight I would like to see. And it's crazy because these 2 guys were champions at the same time, where Frankie was in the 155-pound division when Cruz was in the 135-pound division. It's insane that they're now in the same division, and Cruz actually might even be the bigger guy. Just shows how much of a legend Frankie is, man. Actually, do you know what's crazier than that? During that time when Frankie and Cruz were champs, Aldo was the champ at the same time, you know? And they were all in different divisions. Frankie was 155, Aldo was 145, Cruz was 135, and they're all in the same division now. I mean, I remember watching Aldo before he was even in the UFC. When he was in the WEC, when he fought Uriah Faber, I watched that live. I remember Frankie Edgar when he was the champ. I remember Dominic Cruz when he was in WEC. And to see them all now in the same division, kind of close to each other in the rankings, this is like a dream come true for some of the old school fans. Able to finally see these 3, I mean Frankie and Aldo already fought, but these 3 fight each other, mix it up, that's awesome. But it was always speculated that Jose Aldo would defeat all of them, right? Jose Aldo would defeat Frankie Edgar, Jose Aldo would defeat Dominic Cruz. We'll see, man. I'd like to see Aldo versus Cruz as well. And then Pedro Munhoz, probably going to drop a few spots. I would like to see him fight Jimmy Rivera, rematch him, because they did fight in 2015 and it was a super close fight. Split decision win for Jimmy Rivera, right? 5 years later, both of them have made plenty of strides in their careers. I like to see that get run back. If Frankie gets booked with Dominic Cruz, I could also see him doing Pedro Munhoz versus Jose Aldo. I actually think it's a really good fight. Pedro Munhoz will bring the beast out of Jose Aldo, right? If you come at him with that kind of brawling style, Aldo's going to oblige, and that would be a war. We also know now that Pedro Munhoz could go 5 rounds, so it could be a fight that Munhoz really wants, you know? So all in all, it was an exciting card. So many finishes, so many great fights. And like I always say, these kind of cards that look weak are always the best cards to watch. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to thumbs up. If you enjoyed my content, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.